As you've seen, the scheduled reopening of what were announced 4 regions as of yesterday will begin tomorrow. As of this time, Central New York has not yet been declared ready, but we are expecting to hear some news today from the governor. He is in Central New York. So we're hopeful that as of tomorrow, the Central New York region will also be open. There are a series of things that organizations and companies will need to do related to the reopening. I would encourage everyone, if you haven't yet looked, to go to forward.ny.gov, where the entire outline of the phases are included, to include what industries would be in the phase 1 reopening in those 4 regions and beyond. So the areas that are involved with the reopening are construction, agriculture, forestry, fishing and hunting, retail, but that is limited to curbside or in-store pickup or drop-off, manufacturing, and wholesale trade. I would continue to watch as this is an evolving situation around each one of those areas. You will find links now for each of the areas. So if you're in manufacturing, to include those essential manufacturers who were previously open, everyone will need to log into the website and follow through in identifying your company and/or organization and go through the steps outlined on the link. It's my understanding that you do not need to wait. You shouldn't wait to hear back. It's meant to provide you the necessary information related to both mandatory guidelines, best practices, as well as you need to fill out a form. All of that's done through the portal on the website. If you're having any challenges with doing that, you can contact our team at MACNY. It is going to be a challenging time, as we know, for the implementation of phase 1. The way I understand it as of now is that we will be doing phase 1 for probably 2 weeks for the regions that are open. MACNY, as you know, covers multiple regions. And if Central New York is allowed to reopen today, the vast majority of our members will have the opportunity on the manufacturing sector to be open. I've heard from many of those that are not open yet. They were not essential manufacturers. They will begin their process of reopening. Most of what I've heard is there'll be a gradual reopening, a slow reopening, which I would advise. There's a series of really important protocols that are going to be necessary to keep workers safe and to keep your facility open. And it's important that you do all those things. We're here to help you. You can find a tab on our website, Keeping People Safe and Factories Running, which is a collaborative approach amongst manufacturers. The first cohort of 13 is launched. We're ready to launch 2 additional cohorts within the next week or so. If you're interested in joining, you don't need to be a MACNY member to do that. You can join the cohort. You can find the information on our website. I know our alliance partners across the state are planning on doing the same thing, or are currently in process of doing that. So we're excited to be doing that with them statewide. We have a big job ahead for all of us to do that well. I'd also encourage you to look at the next phases, and if you're in one of those areas, to begin immediately in your preparation. As you know, you'll have to find PPE. You'll have to put protocols in place. You'll need to start communicating with members of your staff. I mean, a whole series of things will need to be done to be open safely. If you haven't yet, most of you probably have, if you haven't seen the metrics really are health metrics. For having a community open, and it's done by region, not by counties, done by regions, we will have to, as a community, maintain those health metrics. You may have seen the capital region, which originally had met all 7, took a step back in one of the health metrics and is no longer going to be opening on Friday unless that metric changes. So the metrics are increasingly apparent, and we need to pay attention to them. So I'm going to stop there and begin taking questions as we go forward. We want to try to answer as many as we can. There may be questions we can't answer. I will take those forward. Yeah, I have a routine call daily now with the regional control room from Central New York. Those questions either get answered at those calls or get forwarded to the right people in Albany. So we'll continue to seek questions and get answers. And this is true for those throughout the state as in your control rooms. Some of them are highly localized questions. I would encourage you to contact the individuals in your control rooms. They're all publicly acknowledged now. You'll see that on the website, forwardnewyork.gov, forward.newyork.gov. And you'll end up being able to see who your representatives are if you're in other regions other than Central New York. So I'm going to stop there and have Marissa start asking the questions. Please ask your questions through the chat function so that Marissa can get them organized and we can begin to talk about this. Marissa.
All right. For clarity, if Central New York is allowed to open tomorrow, does that mean they can operate tomorrow or is it after tomorrow?
I'm sure I don't know the exact start time. I would pay attention to the website. And again, we in Central New York don't yet know. We're waiting for the governor's announcement. We'll find out whether or not that's going to happen today. And if not, then we'll wait until we meet the metrics and we get approval for the reopening. But it's our understanding that once we have the go-ahead for Central New York for reopening, then you will be required to go ahead and fill out the form, whether you've been open or not. I think that's something you should plan on doing because it's clear as I read the guidelines. The guidelines apply both to non-essential businesses that are permitted to reopen and essential businesses throughout the state that were previously permitted to remain open. So from what I read, it will require, even if you're an essential manufacturer, to go into the website, onto the portal and enter your answers. Print the form that you'll be filling out, keep it on premise. That's our understanding.
Did you say that essential employers need to follow the same guidelines as those wanting to reopen?
I did. That's our understanding, that essential employers who will also need to go through the same process.
Okay, a kind of specific question here. As a contractor covered by the phase 1 reopening, what effect does that have on the support operations that are currently working in the home office? Examples would be estimators, project managers, project coordinators, HR, IT, sales, etc. During the period of essential construction, it was advised that those types of employees work from home to the greatest extent possible. Is that restriction now lifted or is that still in place?
All restrictions and requirements are still in place. I would encourage you to continue to work remotely as much as possible. What we're trying to do, we all have to understand that the reopening will come with its own challenges. And we'll have to make sure we don't end up with flare-ups, that our health matrix don't cross back into the territory above the guideline. So it is critical that we all do this smartly, and that we continue to adhere to the CDC guidelines and the state's requirements. So density requirements will also apply. This is not in any way removing any of the requirements. And you will see if you go to the website, they lay out the mandatory guidelines and best practices guidelines. It's important that you read through them and that you're following them. As far as I understand, the enforcement mechanisms will be local as well as state. So you're going to want to be highly focused on following them, to include keeping as many people remote as possible.
Thanks, Randy. Another clarifying question, that form that you referenced, where can it be found?
It's on forward.ny.gov. You will see that as you look at each of the segments, they have their own guidelines. So for example, in phase 1, they've got construction guidelines, agricultural, forestry, fishing, hunting guidelines, the retail guidelines, and then there are what's called phase 1 manufacturing lists. that is just really a list of manufacturers. You can view the summary guidelines, which I referred to. You have to read and affirm the detailed guidelines. Then you'll have to print what's called print business safety plan template, which you're going to be. So those three elements you will need to do as both an essential manufacturer and now a non-essential manufacturer. It's again done by region. You'll be asked to do those things. It's important that you do those things, and that's going to be critical to moving forward. But it is on the forward.ny.gov website. You can also find those links on our website amongst our resources. And we'll continue to update New York Forward as there is additional guidance, additional insight, and other resources that will continue to evolve. One of the things that that I think is critical here is to understand the virus has really challenged us at so many different levels, and that's not going to stop. And so we're going to have to continue to be flexible, adaptive. I would highly encourage you to be as flexible as with your employees as humanly possible, because it's critical that we get back to work safely, that people are complying, and that we're taking into account the needs that people have. Obviously, we have to, and you have to run operations, but this is a time to find accommodations whenever possible.
Could we use the crumbling infrastructure as a means to employ workers to help fix the roads, bridges, etc.? Any thoughts on putting people to work with shovels and other jobs to get people back to work quicker, since construction is one of the first to open?
I don't have any specific ideas. My sense is a lot of construction obviously has to do with the need for it. There are many construction projects were essential projects. And so they were going forward. They're public projects. I suspect as construction begins to come up and open more broadly, we'll see a whole lot more construction. So I do expect some of that to happen. We could see some of that in the next phase 4 federal legislation that is now being negotiated in conversation in Washington. And I know a lot of the phase 4 conversation will have an impact on states as they work through the details on a state funding package, which I know is imperative for the state.
Question about supply chain. I don't see manufacturing supply chain listed on the forward.ny.gov site under phase 1. Is your understanding that supply chain is still part of phase 1?
I do believe that it is. If you have a specific question about your industry, I can attempt to get that answered. So if you'll email myself or Tiffany Latino-Gerlach, that would be helpful for us to try to address maybe your specific concern.
Yeah, I just dropped our general email box into the chat. It's info@macny.org.
Please use that then.
Let's see. Should regions that remain closed encourage those non-essential businesses to move forward with certification now?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer specifically to that. You will not be allowed to be open until the region has been declared open. It doesn't hurt, obviously, to prepare yourself to do that, but whether you file now or not, you won't be allowed to be open. So I think that's critical. I know that our alliance partners, especially in the Buffalo area, the capital region, Mid-Hudson, and down New York City and Long Island are not in a position yet for the reopening. It's probably wise to wait to do that, to be familiar with it. I said earlier, and I keep telling people, you cannot overplan for the reopening. The challenges are significant as we talk to our members. So I think it's important to be prepared, though I personally wouldn't encourage you to do any filing yet because I don't think it's relevant to what's going to be happening.
Thanks, Randy. Just a comment here on OSHA. Looking at the reopening New York, it does not really speak about OSHA and its requirements for PPE, including training and having a respiratory program in place. The general duty clause and other areas need to be followed by all employers. More information at OSHA.gov.
Yeah, obviously, any government requirements are not being relieved in any way. OSHA is still very applicable, and in my sense is many of these guidelines, you should pay attention to them, will continue to be updated at the CDC, Department of Health, New York State. Many of these guidelines will continue to go through revisions. It's important to stay vigilant in looking back at things like OSHA, CDC, and so forth.
I've gotten a couple of questions about where to find this information on the phase 1 reopening, so I'm going to paste that into the chat right now.
Thank you, Marissa.
Forward.ny.gov, and there's a bunch of subpages from there. And I just did the direct link for industries reopening for those who are looking for it.
And I would say that the manufacturing list is not exhaustive. So, if you have a question, do let us know or reach out to your local government officials.
So let's see, another question here about Western New York. So is there any word on when the Western New York region will open? We are a manufacturer in Wellsville, New York, and ready to go.
Well, I'm glad to hear you're ready to go, because I do think there are others throughout the state in the manufacturing sector that are prepared and ready to go. There is no word yet. Again, you need to watch, and you can watch that through, forward.ny.gov, the metrics. It's all driven by the data and the metrics. When the region is able to hit all 7 metrics in measurements, then the region will be allowed to open. That's been what we've been doing, and I suspect that'll still be the path. I know there are numerous questions around when and how, but I know each of the control rooms are diligently working. For Central New York, we were working hard on the testing component. I think we've been successful. I'm hopeful that we'll get the go-ahead today. But each region will be responding to making sure they focus on their metrics and how those metrics get green. So now we're going to get the red out. We're going to go green by region. And it's also, the way I understand it, it makes sense to me. You want a phased-in approach to regions so that we don't overwhelm the health system. And we can all be advocates for staying safe and not being a part of the spread. So we can be leaders in this space as well.
Thanks, Randy. Is MACNY planning to offer any in-person training under professional services once phase 2 kicks in?
We went all digital. We have not yet, and not sure we will be scheduling any in-person training. A lot of manufacturers and organizations prefer not to have visitors on site. You can get all of the training. We're adding new components to it. All of our training, and many other trainers, by the way, not just our trainers, are adding new components related to the virus, its impacts on leadership, its impact on responsibilities. So I would highly encourage anyone who, and I would encourage training. This is a good time to do training as people are home or maybe they're not fully there. So I don't expect right now, even in phase 2, for open meetings. We will, like others, move into the new normal. We will have a model that will be both remote and in person, but that's sometime in the future. We're currently developing procedures that we would use to do that well, and so that would be our expectation over time to do it, but no, not initially. I don't see us doing in-person events or meetings right away.
As we implement health screening, is daily temperature check required for each employee? If so, is it just at the beginning of their shift or throughout?
Temperature screening is a best practice. Some are doing it upon entry. Some are doing it at home. Employees do it at home. Most are not doing it throughout the day, though people are monitoring their wellness to make sure that they are feeling well and don't expose others should they have caught the COVID-19 condition somewhere in the community. So I expect that that temperature taking will be one of the criteria. It's not a perfect criteria, especially if someone is asymptomatic, but it's also a best practice. So I would attempt, if you can. It gives you another metric to help people both realize when they might be getting sick. It may not be COVID related at all, but it is important to notice when people are sick. And you'll have to be implementing that in your own facilities as best meets your needs. They're not recording. That is, they're not keeping records in the companies that we're familiar with that are doing this. They're doing it primarily and exclusively as just a screen to keep people safe. So it's not a metric where people are recording and logging in, by individual who's got what temperature. So those who are doing it.
We have a collective bargaining agreement. Are there legal issues that have been sidelined on temperature screening?
I really, I can't answer that. You'll have to turn to your own legal representation. We understand there's a lot of gray areas here, but I definitely would get a firm understanding, and I would obviously be working with your union on all of these processes. These are intended to keep everybody safe. So my hope is that everybody would be open to talking about how to best do these things, and what best protects the individual, the organization, and of course privacy. But the key is to have these kinds of procedures in place. But this is just one of many behavior changes that the members who we have talked to that are open have made. Everything from reworking design to social distancing to now mask wearing, frequent and routine hand sanitation, over communicating with employees really and stakeholders, positive site control. These are all things you'll find sort of the key elements that are on keeping people safe, as well as in the state guidelines. I can't encourage you enough to consider working with other manufacturers as you reopen and as you open more broadly. I have seen firsthand the benefits of doing that. You learn things from others, tips and hacks and all the other things that are helpful. So please learn from others, even if it's someone down the road or a colleague as they have gone through it or going through it. There's a lot to learn as we adapt these new behaviors.
If we are an essential employer who has been open and we have met most of the requirements, is there a deadline for meeting all of the mandatory requirements which just came out last night?
There's no indication of a deadline, but you are required to work and to meet those standards. So work diligently to do that. Those are the standards. They conform to best practice and mandatory practices. I have reviewed them myself. I see the value of them. So you're going to need to find a way to meet the guidelines and standards. And that's one of the reasons why I do think you want help, because every one of these standards are being met in some way by MACNY members and manufacturers. So it's important to do that as you go through this process. You may not have fulfilled. I don't really trying to say it the best. It's difficult on day one to necessarily have full implementation of all of your procedures, but you will need to work diligently to get that in place.
As a manufacturer in Western New York who has been working on essential jobs only, we need to do a physical inventory count. Would this process be able to be completed providing all safety and PPE precautions are taken? And again, this is Western New York.
Yeah, that's probably a good question to ask of your regional representation. Yeah, I know locally there have been questions like that have gone to our local Empire State Development Regional Director, and that they best can walk you through. I'd rather not comment specifically on that particular case. But you should reach out, get some guidance on it, and that way you'll have a better understanding of what you can and can't do. Because you're not yet into phase one reopening, then that's probably a nuanced question that has to be answered by someone from the region would be the best.
Also just had a comment come through. Indian Corporation has been open because they are an essential business. They would be happy to share their best practices with anyone interested.
Yeah, Indian, one of the key partners in keeping people safe. Ross there, along with his entire team, have been working this from day one, as many have. So they're a good example. You know, and thanks to India and Ross and his entire team for the hard work they've done to help get everybody ready, not only themselves, but their entire cohort, and of course, informing our new program, which has really taken off.
Allegheny County has a much lower rate of infection and death rate than many counties that are opening. Is there anything that can be done to separate ourselves from the Buffalo and Western region, and or what can we and our regional government do to facilitate this initiative quickly?
There's nothing I know of. You are a part of a region, and part of the healthcare system that's in the region. And every question I've heard asked around this, both in Central New York and beyond, has been the same answer: that we are part of regions. We're opening as regions. We're managing this as regions. So I don't believe there's anything that can be done at this time, other than as the region progresses, to be ready and to be a part of keeping people safe in your region. This is a regional challenge, and all the metrics are done by regions. So when a region spikes, everybody will be impacted. That'll be true of Central New York. It'll be true of every region, as we go forward.
Another question about temperature checks. Are you saying the daily temperature check is best practice or mandatory practice?
Well, you'll have to look specifically at the guideline, but I believe it's a best practice. They do have examples in the mandatory, but there are a variety of ways to work on the health equation. I personally think that some form of temperature check is really good practice. It's a way to get it. Not only is it good for the health reasons, it's good for everyone to understand that when you're not feeling well, you're best to stay home. And so I believe temperature checks is the best practice. I think the way it's written is it's listed as an example of a best practice. I think it's one of the best things you can do.
Yes, I think if you go ahead and look at those PDFs on the website provided, there is specific guidance about all of these things, including hygiene, cleaning, screening, and testing. So it's all available right there.
Relatively thorough understanding of what's necessary as you reopen it or as you remain open safely.
I'm just going to give another moment here in case any questions come through. It is completely understandable that the current focus is on reopening existing businesses, but what about opening new business ventures? And in the case I represent, it would fit the essential business definition. Is there any different guidance you would give?
Yeah, I don't have any specific guidance. I think it depends on the business and the region. Obviously, there's a host series of protocols required to open a business is already in place. I would follow through with those protocols, but I don't personally see any reason why a new business opening up that follows all the requirements related to existing businesses being open wouldn't fall under the same requirements. I do think that they would stay it would still be within the required guidelines for existing businesses in that category.
That's all I have right now.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone joining us. The challenges ahead are immense, but the good news is we'll do it together and working with our partners from throughout the state. We're here to help you do this. And our hope is that we won't fall back. But I do think we'll be challenged everywhere throughout the state and, of course, in the regions we represent. We wish you well. We'll continue to give you updates. And it's always a pleasure to hear from all of you. We'll continue to work with you. And as I always tell people, what you want to do is be calm, stay safe, and carry on. Have a nice day, everyone.